welcome back to another episode of From the Couch Sports. I am your host, Connor, and tonight I want to get into the MMA events over the weekend, and then also to cover a little bit of the boxing as well. I'll watch the Canelo fight and the UFC card. A big win on the Bellator card the other night. I think this was this was last night on Friday. Yoel Romero was fighting. He had a crazy finish at the end of the fight. So Yoel Romero's whole thing is most of his career is he's very patient and he just explodes in the big punches, and he can usually put his opponents out like that. But he hasn't fought a lot, and as recently he hasn't been the best. He hasn't been winning a lot, and he got cut from the UFC, or I think he might have just his contract might have been up. But anyways, he went to Bellator and he didn't have a great first fight. But this last night, at 45 years old, he looks better than ever almost. Literally 8 seconds left in the fight, he lands a straight left that sits his opponent down, jumps on top of him, lands an elbow, and then lets his opponent get up and lands a clean uppercut while his opponent's getting up, and they called the fight with a second left. It was crazy, and it even looked like the fight could have just gone to the end, but because his opponent was so wobbled, they gave him the TKO. That was a crazy fight. I think that was his best performance in a few years, probably since the Paulo Costa fight. And then also yesterday we had the PFL. For anyone that doesn't know, the PFL is it's an MMA organization that's on ESPN. They have got a lot of former UFC fighters, and as well as some other notable names, and they have a very unique organization. So they do a season format basically, where if you win a fight, it's on a point system. So you get a certain number of points depending on how early you finish the fight or how the fight goes. So if it's a decision, you get the least amount of points. If you get a first round knockout, you get more than you would for a second round knockout, and so forth. And so it's very interesting because if you're the champion, you kind of start over in the new season. It's kind of like a season of basketball or something. And technically the Bucks are the defending champions in the NBA. But they're playing. It's not like their belt's on the line every single time. So it's kind of like that in the PFL. You have to make the playoffs again and then perform in the playoffs again. So it's a very unique setup. And there's some fun fighters. And one thing that is kind of odd, if you miss weight in the PFL, you're not eligible for points at all. So and you might even get a negative point. I want to say it's either a 0 or a negative, which is crazy. So last year's I think this is the welterweight champ, Ray Cooper the third. He won the championship last year. Had a crazy run. This first fight he didn't make weight, fighting against Carlos Leo, and so basically he was just gonna fight to fight. Basically, still get paid and everything, but you're not making points if you do win to go to the playoffs or anything. And so he pretty much just got beat in this fight. Carlos Leo landed a bunch of big shots, was forcing Ray Cooper to wrestle a lot, and he ended up losing that. So it's interesting to see where that's gonna go from there. And then the other thing about the PFL that's fun is the end of the season when they have the playoffs, they have the championship and everything. Whoever wins it all, they get $1 million check. So that's kind of cool for what's a smaller promotion compared to a Bellator and the UFC. And they're definitely kind of on the come up. But they do have a couple other former UFC fighters that fought last night. Anthony Pettis, he got a submission win over Miles Price. This was a fun submission just in the first round too, which was awesome. And then Rory McDonald also had a submission win over Brett Cooper. Those are two guys that they didn't have the greatest seasons last year for the PFL. I think Anthony Pettis lost both of his fights. He lost a fight to Clay Collard, and then I'm not 100% sure who the second one was. I believe it's a Brazilian that's fighting in that weight class. And then Rory McDonald lost to Ray Cooper last year, I believe. So they're starting this year with finishes in the first round, so they already have a head start. Because I think they only fight 2 or 3 times before the playoffs. So if you already get a couple finishes, I think that's like 6 points if you get a first round finish. So it's an interesting format. And then probably their biggest superstar is Kayla Harrison. She's a female MMA fighter, fights at 155 pounds. She was recently like a free agent, and she was going to sign with Bellator, but the PFL had the option to match her contract. So she remains with the PFL, and she fought again against Marina. I'm probably going to butcher this last name. I haven't heard it in a day or so. Maknatakina. But anyways, this fight was Kayla Harrison kind of trying to get to the fight to the ground, and then, trying the ground and pound submission. It was just kind of a decision at the end. No like big finish or anything like that. But we'll see. Like the PFL has said in the past that they're going to do like crossover promotional fights, and I think that would be cool if they could do Kayla Harrison versus Cyborg, Bellator versus PFL. I think that would be really cool. The only thing is like with the PFL, like you don't technically have champions at this point in the PFL like season and everything. So I don't know how something like that would work. But I think it would be a fun matchup. That's what everyone wants to see. That's why she should have gone to Bellator, so she could fight the best. But moving on to tonight, we just had a fun card and then some other like not so fun moments. I'm gonna start with the main event. So Charles Oliveira, like to kick things off yesterday, the weigh-ins. They say that Charles went to bed Thursday night at 155 pounds. He wakes up. Apparently like 1 or 2 scales, he's 155 pounds, and then he gets on the official scale, he's 155 and a half. They gave him an hour to cut more weight. He tries to cut weight for another hour, and then still doesn't get the weight off. So basically they strip the belt from him, and there's a little bit of controversy to it. I've heard a few different people think that, something funny was going on with the scales in Arizona. I guess Arizona's like law for fights like this, the weigh-in's supposed to be later in the day, and some people are saying like the scales weren't recalibrated, so a lot of fighters ended up being over their normal weight. But the thing is like the championship fights are usually the only ones that matter if you're exactly on weight, because any other fight you have like the pound allowance. So a lot of times people, like if you're not fighting at a championship fight, you might weigh in at 155 and a half or 156. So for that, like, yeah, I think there was like 20 something that 22 or 24, something like that, other fighters that didn't like make the exact championship weight technically. But I don't think that necessarily means like something was off with the scales. But a lot of people think that there was something going on with the scales that was causing that, because for Oliveira not to lose any weight from in that whole hour when he stepped back onto the scales, that was kind of crazy. And like they had thought he weighed in at that weight. But nonetheless, like the UFC just made the decision right away. And I mean, this is like the first time this has ever happened for a champion. They basically take the belt away from him. They made this fight with Justin Gaethje the winner. If it was Gaethje would take home the belt. If it's Oliveira, he didn't get to take home the belt. Which is it's kind of bittersweet, because it's like he just had a phenomenal win, and Oliveira is clearly the champion of the world. He's clearly the best fighter at 155 at this point. So not to be able to take your belt home was kind of disappointing, but it's also part of the sport. There's the other side to it, that like, this is your contractual weight, like there's not a lot of sympathy for other fighters when they don't make weight. I think the main reason that there's a little bit more for Charles is because of the way that some of like the rumors going on with Arizona were happening. But anyways, this fight was less than a round, but it was just fireworks the entire time. Like literally to start things off, it looks like Charles landed the big shot, kind of hurt Justin, and then Justin just got into the throwing everything in his entire like just these punches he was just throwing all of his body weight into. I mean, there was a time where he literally fell because he threw such a hard punch that missed. And he landed a couple big, big shots. He dropped Charles Oliveira, and then Charles is kind of inviting him to come down to the ground. But Charles is just like, he's so fun to watch. He just gets up and marches forward and keeps going every single fight, no matter what. Like, he can be clipped and hurt and everything. This fight, he was bleeding, and he just kept pushing forward. And then he dropped Justin later in the first round, and then just jumped on his back. And for like, I don't know, it was a short period of time, like 20, 30 seconds. He pulled off like attempted 2 or 3 submissions and ended up getting a finish, choking Justin Gaethje out. And so I mean, this is like, he's in my opinion one of the funnest fighters, because every fight he's going to finish. He's constantly pushing forward, and he's in the fight, and he can win at any moment. But it's also, there's a part of that that's, he could also lose at any moment because he's so susceptible to getting dropped. Like, he literally he got dropped by Chandler, by Poirier, by Gaethje, and every single time he gets back up. And you know, the thing that's different is his ground game. He's so dangerous on the ground, off his back, you know, anywhere when it comes to the ground, that when a fighter drops him, they're not usually jumping on top trying to finish him, because they know like the danger that they'd be in. And he's dangerous at any moment, even after he's been like hurt and everything. And I think at this point he's probably dispelled the whole Charles Oliveira is a quitter things that like the last 3 opponents have said, all before they hurt him, and then he finished all 3 of them. So he's just an amazing fighter at this point. The next fight has to be Islam Makhachev. I think that fight is going to be a ton of fun, because when we think like Khabib versus Tony Ferguson, this is kind of like the newer version of that, in my opinion. I think Charles might even be better than that version of Tony, and Islam is, you know, he's on the come up as well, trying to, you know, follow behind what Khabib has laid out. So I think that's going to be a crazy fight. That's probably the fight they book next. I know Dana had talked about Islam having to rebook the fight with Beneil Dariush, and unless Oliveira does something crazy like fighting McGregor or something like that, then I think that's the next logical step, and I think that's the funnest matchup you can make. And the thing that's going to be interesting is Islam doesn't usually like hurt people too much on the feet. Like, he certainly has better stand-up than Khabib did, but I think Charles is going to be better in that aspect, where some of his last opponents, he was, you know, right there, but most people would say like Justin's the better straight stand-up fighter, and same thing with Dustin Poirier. So I think that's a super interesting fight that they should make next. Charles Oliveira is the champ. He says the champ has a name, and his name is Charles Oliveira. That's like all he's been echoing ever since like losing weight or missing weight. So he's a ton of fun to watch. I can't wait to see what's going on next, what fight they make next for him. And then the co-main event, this was Rose Namajunas versus Carla Esparza, a rematch from 7.5 years ago. And this was like maybe this had to have been one of the worst fights ever. It's hard not to say that. Like, they literally fought for 5 rounds, and there was hardly any action at all. Like, there was maybe two rounds that had like, if you were to combine all the strikes and grappling exchanges, there was maybe like a total minute of the whole fight where there was anything happening besides them just feeling out and basically punching air, like, you know, throwing distance punches. And so, you know, it got to the end, and it was like, how do you even score this fight? Because like, nobody did anything definitive. Nobody hurt their opponent. There wasn't anything like actually happened on the ground. Carla Esparza basically pushed forward more of the fight, and she landed a couple takedowns. I don't know the exact number, but I think she landed maybe 3 or 4. She didn't do anything with them. Rose got up almost immediately each time, and, you know, nobody really did anything big in the striking category, so it's like, it's so difficult for them to score that. I think it was a split decision for Carla. She ends up winning the belt, kind of a crazy way to win. Like, neither of them looked like they even were in a fight, and they were fighting for close to 30 minutes. So like literally the commentary and everything was just, man, this is a horrible fight. Joe Rogan even at the interview was mentioning how boring it was, and they're getting booed like crazy from the crowd. Just a crazy like fight that you didn't expect. I mean, I thought there was going to be a lot more. I think Rose might have been a little bit hesitant, like to take things to the ground with the outcome that happened in the last fight. But also, like, it got to a point where like Rose had gotten right up once she had taken down a couple times, and it's like, I don't know like why there's not more action happening in this fight. But yeah, I mean that sums that fight up. I mean, it was pretty boring. I mean, I really don't like to say that about a fight, but that one definitely stood out as, one of the fights that there was the least amount of action in, and that also happened to be a 5-round, 25-minute fight, so that made things a little bit worse. And then the fight before this, though, this was crazy. So there was a big space before this because they announced DC was in the Hall of Fame, and then there was just a brutal knockout between Michael Chandler and Tony Ferguson. So I said in my last video, like, this was a hard fight to look at it in both perspectives, because both of these guys are on, losing streaks, and whoever's going to lose this fight is going to be on a bigger losing streak. And like, for Tony Ferguson, this goes from, you had lost a couple fights to, the best of the best, and still Michael Chandler fits into that category. But now I think he's on a four fight losing streak. And I mean, this was just an absolutely brutal knockout. The fight started, and Tony was actually doing really good. Chandler was loading up on big punches, and Tony was just landing clean, crisp shots, and he was hurting Chandler in the first round. And then towards the second part of the first round, Chandler, started grappling more. He shot and took him down, and he did a lot. Like, he kind of held the ground position for the rest of the first round, and it looked good going into the second round. It looked like Tony Ferguson at moments had like hurt Chandler to like maybe he could get a finish, and he was looking like, classic Tony. And then the second round came, and like literally almost immediately, I think it was like within the first 10-15 seconds, Michael Chandler just had a crazy kick, just a straight kick. I mean, it almost looked like a soccer kick the way it landed. And Tony Ferguson had like stepped and put all of his body weight forward. This kick lands and just completely knocks him out. He falls on his face, and he's out for like a few minutes. It was kind of a, it was probably one of the craziest knockouts of that type. But it was also like one of those scary knockouts. Like, there's a few like when they land like face first, and especially some of their positions with their necks and everything. That's a scary knockout. I hope everything's okay. They need to take this guy to the hospital because that was just so brutal. Kind of like the when Yuri was fighting Dominic Reyes and he landed that back spinning elbow, and Reyes fell. Like it was kind of like that for Ferguson, and he was on the ground for a few minutes, and it was, that's tough to see. And then he got Michael Chandler doing like 6 backflips in a row. And then he, to end this, he had crazy call out. Basically, it was like, whoever wins the main event, a rematch with me would be an amazing fight because both of our fights were great wars. And then if that doesn't pan out, then I would be the perfect fit to fight Conor McGregor in his next fight. I'm willing to do that at 170. That's a fight that McGregor even responded saying like he definitely wants to fight Chandler sometime in his career. Like Michael Chandler versus Conor McGregor, like this summer would be insane. That would be a massive pay-per-view card. These are like Conor McGregor is, anytime he fights, he's selling crazy pay-per-views. And Michael Chandler is kind of coming into his own as one of the biggest guys in the UFC. Like every one of his fights, win or lose, has been incredible. And so to book that fight, I think that would be awesome. I definitely want to see that. And then to move a little bit past some UFC stuff, I watched the boxing fight tonight too. Canelo Alvarez fought Dimitri Bivol, and I mean, like, he was fighting at 175 at light heavyweight, and Canelo actually lost. Bivol just like he clearly he had the size, the length, and he had a really nice jab, and he just consistently, landing shots on Canelo. He wasn't landing like massive shots to like knock Canelo out or anything, but he was landing big shots, just constantly putting it on him, and he ended up winning majority decision. I mean, he won by a few rounds. It wasn't even like it wasn't really that close. Like they said in the ring, like Canelo thought he had won, but I don't think I saw anyone else agree that Canelo had won. He definitely lost this one. Um, but I mean, it was a good fight. Like this fight was going on during the Rose Namajunas Carla Esparza fight, so I ended up pretty much watching the Canelo fight because in the Rose fight they weren't fighting really. Um, but like Canelo just pushing forward, trying to land big shots. And then Bivol just he was just constantly using the jab and just landing pace, and he clearly won this fight by decision. I'm curious. I think Canelo's already on like a 3-fight deal, so I'm pretty sure they've already like agreed that Triple G's the next opponent. So I'm still excited for that. I always tune in whenever Canelo fights, but it is something that's just interesting. And then yeah, stay tuned if you enjoy the content. If you like MMA, basketball, football, New York Jets, I cover a lot on the page. Please like and subscribe to the channel. It means a lot. And thanks for tuning in.